guys, that usually you get a breath and you just stop breathing. Kind of like the sense of smell, you have another nerve in your brain. It's called the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve is what tells your lungs to breathe for you. Okay, and H2S attacks the phrenic nerve at about 600 parts per million is the lethal dose, as I mentioned earlier. It can paralyze the phrenic nerve, and you just stop breathing. So really, how H2S kills you, it just suffocates you. You don't breathe. I mean, you die from lack of oxygen is what you die from. So I don't care if you choked on a donut or got into H2S. Both cases, you died of lack of oxygen. It just happened in two different ways. The other way that H2S affects us, as you breathe this stuff in, just like you would normal oxygen and everything else, it goes through what's called the alveolar sacs in the lung. They're little tiny microscopic sacs in the base of the lung that actually absorbs oxygen out of the air and puts it into your bloodstream and your red blood cells. The problem with H2S, it does the same thing. It gets in there and it goes into your red blood cells, and then it just takes up space. So what that means is you don't get enough oxygen. So a lot of the early symptoms when people get an H2S, they get lightheaded, they get dizzy, they get disoriented, they get a headache. It's really all from lack of oxygen is why you're having those symptoms. So there's the problem with that. So understand, you know, if you're ever out there and you work around with H2S, it gives you a headache, it's just you're not getting as much oxygen as you need. And so it kind of has a little short term. It's not key at that moment, but you will start kind of feeling bad and all that. So we got to be very careful of that. So let's be careful to make sure we understand, you know, kind of what's happening to us when we do breathe this stuff. A couple other things, guys. Let's kind of go over some basic properties of it. You know, the heavier in air deal is a big one, so I'll never forget about that. Flares. If you've ever been around H2S wells, a lot of times you'll see flare stacks out there where they're venting gas and they're flaring it. Now that's a good thing in a way, but it's not, you know, you don't hang out there around the flare stack, because when you burn H2S, you burn up about 80% of the volume of gas that's coming out the flare, but you don't actually burn any concentration. So if the well's producing 1,000, as they flare it, there's still 1,000 coming out that flame. So, but what happens when you burn gas? What's it do? It gets hotter, doesn't it? What's hot air do? It rises. So it's good, that's why they do that. Instead of venting it out and just settling on location out there and you have more of it, we get rid of 80% of the amount of it, and what's left, we heat it up, it goes up in the atmosphere, hits the wind, and dissipates. It's gone. So that's why they do that. But, you know, there are certain areas of the company, you used to hear about, I've read some stuff up in like Canada and places like that, they'd flare that stuff, they'd have what's called fallout. It gets so cold, it'd be minus 50 degrees, that gas would heat up and it'd pull off so fast, it'd settle right back down on the ground. And there'd be people get killed sometimes out by the flare stack because it was so cold they were having fallout. Which here we don't get that cold usually. Now, last year, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly what temperature fallout happens, but it's extremely cold before that will happen. But normally flaring's a good thing and we won't get rid of it. One other thing, and we're about done, guys, is when you mix H2S with water, it forms a hydrosulfuric acid, okay? It's kind of like a weak battery acid. That's why if you've ever worked in it, it irritates your eyes. Because what happens is, if it's in the atmosphere, out there on a well site, whatever, you know, you're in it, it's going to get in your eyes because your eyes got moisture in them, right? Which is primarily water, that tears that lubricate the eyeball. That'll absorb in there, and what will happen is it'll irritate your eyes. And then what do your eyes do? Well, they water more because something's irritating them. And then when they water more, there's more acid for them, and it irritates them more. So typically when your eyes water, when you get something in them, that's a good thing because it helps flush it out. In the H2S world, it's a bad thing just because it creates more acid. Okay, now that's a discomfort. That acid's not going to blind you. Now, if you had it enough, it'll swell your eyes shut. It could cause an eye infection, conjunctivitis in your eye and all that. That's kind of a nasty thing. The big deal is in your lungs. When you breathe this stuff in your lungs, when you breathe it's in the air, you also have mucus in your lungs, which is primarily water. It'll do the exact same thing your eyes do. It'll absorb into the mucus. It'll irritate it. And if you don't get out, if you stayed in it or somebody gets overcome and they're laying there, even though, because a lot of times people think when you stop breathing, you're not dead, technically. Your heart's still beating for about, your heart will beat about 4 to 6 minutes after you get rendered unconscious from H2S. Or whether you choked on a donut or a cheeseburger or whatever, because you still have a little bit of oxygen left in your lungs. You have some oxygen in your blood. Your heart will circulate, and that oxygen's being absorbed. And so after about roughly 5 minutes, then death occurs. You run out of air. Now you use that up. Brain will start shutting things down. Heartbeat will stop, and that's kind of what happens in the H2S world. But the problem is, as you're laying there for about 5 minutes while your heart's beating, you're accumulating acid in your lungs that's forming in your mucus. Your body's defense mechanism when your lungs burn is to pump more mucus in the lung, and that's creates more acid. And so one of the big after effects of H2S exposure, we've had some guys go down, you know, they were able to go in and get them rescued, put on masks, respirator, get them out, do CPR, get them breathing again. But every one of those individuals spent time in the hospital from about a week to 4 weeks, depending on how long they were in there. And one of the big effects of that is it's called pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema is when your lungs fill up with fluid, okay? And when your lungs start to fill up with fluid, what can happen? It can kill you, right? Because you're basically kind of drowning in your own fluid. So
You'll make your pants too.
yeah, you done that? Have you ever done that? No. So just understand that and the reason I tell you that, a few weeks ago I was talking to a Rick crew, not here, it was out in Elk City that I do, but he said, man, we was out on H2S a while back and our monitors kept going off. And I said, really? And that, you know, that's the one that's kind of referred to earlier. I said, well, did y'all get out? And he said, no, I was trying to wrap up. It didn't seem that bad. We were, you know, our eyes were kind of burned a little bit. And he said, as long as we're breathing, it won't hurt us. I said, no, it can hurt you. It can hurt you really bad. That pulmonary edema, you know, if you're breathing it and it's getting in your lungs, you can be building fluid up in your lungs. And you're getting to a point where, because what happens to pulmonary edema, that turns into chemical pneumonia. There's 3 types of pneumonia. You get bacterial, viral, and chemical. So a lot of times people with COVID get bacterial, some even get viral. Like my dad, when he had both. He had both of them in both lungs. That's about that near killed him, but that was the problem. Chemical pneumonia is chemically induced where it burns your lungs, and then the fluid comes, and then it turns into an infection, and then that's kind of, so it's how you get it's different, but it kind of all ends up being about the same as far as how it hurts you. But that's why you don't want to mess around with H2S even at low levels. If it's above levels, you don't want to stay in it for any prolonged period of time, because all that crap can be happening in your lungs, and I promise you don't want no part of that. That's a bad deal. So anyway, we got to be smart. So if you guys are ever out there working, you know, pay attention to the wind. Wear your monitor. If your monitor goes off, get your ass out. You know, it's just that is simple. I'm not going to go out there and work on that stuff for somebody's well. You know, it ain't that important. If we've got an H2S problem, they need to get us some help out there. There are H2S safety companies. These companies can hire. They come out there and monitor. They have people that if somebody goes down, they'll rescue you. They got respirators. You know, if it got bad, we could all mask up. Now, you may have to shave. You can't wear a beard with these masks because they got to seal up. And I had a guy, well, it'll be all right. Why would you want to take a chance with that? If you got a beard between it and the mask and it's leaking, possibly because you're breathing hard up there because you don't have a good seal, I'm not taking that chance. If I'm going to have to work around it, I want this sucker sealed up and, you know, provide me good fresh breathing air and keeping all the bad stuff out. So, you know, so if you ever get told we're going to work on, they ask you to shave, you better shave. Because when you get there, they're going to tell you to go home, or they're going to hand you a razor right there dry and tell you to shave right there on the side of the leash road. So I've seen some guys have a lot of beard trying to hack off with a razor, bleeding and whelped up, and burning, and all that. That'll make a tough man of sissy pretty quick when that starts happening. So anyhow, that's about it, guys. I mean, anybody got any other questions?
Can the spark set it off? I know they burn them, but like if a cigarette or a spark, if it's laying heavy on the ground, can a spark set it off?
It can. H2S is 3 times, y'all listen to this, H2S is 3 times more flammable than natural gas.
Oh, shit.
But it takes a pretty high concentration.
So if they put the cigarette with an ember.
Well, it has what's called a lower explosive limit. All fuel does, okay? It's like a carburetor. You know, it has to run, if it's running too rich, kind of backfires, running too lean, you got to get a mixture of air and fuel, and any fires that way, you kind of got to have the right deal. So H2S has to have at least the minimum concentration before it can come explosive is 43,000 parts per million. So if you're out there working, there's 100 parts per million, H2S isn't flammable. If it's 20,000 parts per million, the H2S is flammable. But usually, if you have H2S, you also have hydrocarbons, natural gas, and vapors from the oil or whatever, so it's usually a mixture, so you do have a fire hazard there. So I always tell people, every well we work on has a potential fire hazard, so, you know, we got to eliminate smoking, ignition sources and all that stuff anytime we're out here on the well side. So, any other questions? That's a good question. Anybody got anything else? All right, everybody get signed in, printed name, we're going to read it. If you hadn't signed in, please do. All right, guys. Thank y'all. Everybody have a good day.